we still faithful. I'ma put it all on the table. We forever faithful. Yeah, we still faithful.
All right, what's going on, 49er fans? 49ers head coach Kyle Shanahan and general manager John Lynch wrapped up their end of season press conference down at the 49ers headquarters today at 4949 in Santa Clara. And there were some pretty interesting takeaways from their end of season press conference today in front of the assembled media. I want to go through and just kind of give you kind of my takeaways, my notes that I took away from this press conference. A lot of cookie cutter stuff, but there definitely was some interesting little tidbits in there that should be discussed. So let's just hop right on into it. They started off the press conference, of course, with a question about the injury bug that the 49ers faced in 2025. They gave a really, vanilla answer. They're going to look into everything this offseason. They're going to examine everything. The health and safety, the health and wellness of their players is at the forefront of everything that they do. And they're going to yet again examine why this team continues to be one of the most injured in football. They did get into a little more specifics later on, which we will get to, but just at least to start off the press conference, they did say that, the health and wellness of their players is at the forefront of their minds, and they're going to look into it this offseason to kind of see what happened. Next on the list, they were asked about the possibility of trading backup quarterback Mac Jones, and Kyle Shanahan kind of shot that down. He was pretty quick to say that he would be very surprised if Mac Jones isn't on this team this year. They loved having him in the locker room. They loved having him on board. And, when you have a quarterback like Brock Purdy who has a tendency to get injured, it is very, very important that you have a stable, solid, and ready backup, waiting in the wings. And I think it was a great thing that the Niners did, signing Mac Jones to a 2-year deal, because now they have all options on the table. They can bring Mac back. Maybe if a team knocks their socks off with a trade offer, they do pull the trigger. But from listening to Kyle Shanahan, it doesn't sound like that's something that they're going to entertain, at least not in the near future. Moving on, they were asked about, let's see, what do we have here? They were asked about whether or not they felt that this year the team was kind of ahead of schedule, considering all of the youth on this team, the emphasis on the recent draft classes, the development of the younger players, and also the fact that they didn't spend a ton in free agency. It was kind of viewed as not really a rebuilding year, but kind of a refocus, a shuffling of the deck. And they were asked whether or not they believed that this season was kind of ahead of schedule, and kind of how they plan to spend this off season. Shanahan, he said that they were real disappointed. Like, yeah, they moved on from a lot of players on this roster last offseason, but they were still in a position to, accomplish their goals that they set out for at the beginning of the year. And they, this team made the playoffs and made some noise. But at the end of it all, they came away, not winning a Super Bowl. That's the ultimate goal. And they were really disappointed in the outcome of the season, of course. They are going to be looking at, filling some staff. Of course, we know Robert Saleh, former defensive coordinator, is now with Tennessee. So filling that defensive coordinator role is at the forefront of what they want to do within the next week or so. They want to look ahead, to filling out the rest of their staff, making those sort of decisions. And then, of course, you have the scouting combine, free agency, everything's right around the corner. So the offseason begins in earnest right now. They did also mention, and I thought this was very interesting from John Lynch, general manager John Lynch. He did allude to the fact that after last season's tightening of the purse strings, that going into this offseason, they have a little more flexibility this year. Of course, that comes with absorbing a ton of dead cap last offseason. And, of course, the voiding of Brandon Ayuk's guaranteed money moving forward. They did also, mention some stuff about Ayuk later in the presser, which we will get to. But John Lynch mentioned, he said this specifically, that, they're going to have some more flexibility this offseason than they did last year. So that was a huge, takeaway for me. My ears perked up when I heard John Lynch mentioning, the financial flexibility that this team will have heading into the offseason. Next on the list, they hit on the departure of defensive coordinator Robert Saleh. Uh, Look, I mean, I think anyone who's paying attention to this team knows that it's pretty much Gus Bradley's job to lose. The assistant head coach of defense was his title in 2025 under Robert Saleh. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he was brought in alongside Saleh last offseason. They knew the writing was on the wall that if, Saleh put together a strong season, that he was going to get head coaching considerations this time around. And I think they anticipated losing him. Did they want to lose him? Obviously not. Shanahan said as much. He said that it would have been nice to have Saleh for a second year, and also to get that compensatory pick in return had he coached this team for 2 seasons. But from what Shanahan said, I mean, he said just like what everyone else is saying, Gus Bradley is the obvious in-house choice, but they will cast a net out there. They will explore outside options, but just from the body language, from kind of how things sounded, it sounds like when they do announce the next 49ers defensive coordinator, that more likely than not is going to be Gus Bradley, of course, the godfather of the Seattle cover three. We can get into that later, but from all intents and purposes, it sounds like Gus Bradley is going to be the defensive coordinator just based on how Kyle Shanahan was speaking today. Then they got into the Brandon Ayuk situation. Both Shanahan and Lynch alluded to the fact that, Brandon Ayuk has played his last snaps with the San Francisco 49ers. The reporters in attendance also asked kind of what happened there, tried to get some more insight into that situation. And Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch both said they were just as confused as everyone else, and that they're still trying to figure out exactly what happened because they don't know everything. Now, of course, they're not going to tell you everything. I'm sure they know a lot more than they're letting on. However, they are just as kind of dumbfounded and stumped of how we got here as anyone. And it was confirmed today that Ayuk's going to be gone. They're going to move on from him this offseason at some point. Then they asked about kind of, what are the biggest needs? What is the team going to target this offseason? Now, of course, that's kind of, in my opinion, a dumb question, because what do you think that they're going to say? They're not going to tell you exactly who they're going to target, what positions they're going to target, because that tips their hand. So they kind of, skirted around the question, said they're going to do, whatever they can to improve the team as a whole, yada, yada, yada. That sort of an answer, very vanilla answer. I didn't expect anything when that question was asked, but the team's going to explore all options and all positions in terms of upgrading the roster moving forward. Then they get into the Ricky Pearsall stuff. Wide receiver Ricky Pearsall, who dealt with a ton of injury issues this season with the PCL, the knee injury, and Kyle Shanahan, while saying that they're going to explore, better ways for Ricky to rehab this injury and maybe come back quicker if this thing happens in the future. Shanahan was sort of defensive about Ricky Pearsall, in my opinion. You can tell that Kyle Shanahan really covets the skill set of a Ricky Pearsall. It didn't sound like a guy who was necessarily fed up with a player and his injury issues. It sounded like a coach who wants to give Ricky Pearsall every chance. To me, that's just my takeaways from the press conference today. They're obviously frustrated that Ricky wasn't able to be out there on the field as much as they wanted, but at the same time, like, it was an injury. It wasn't a question of whether or not, like, he was tough enough to play or wanted to play or that sort of thing. At least that's the vibes I got from Kyle Shanahan's answer to this. And they want Ricky to continue to improve, get healthier, get stronger, continue to develop, so that maybe some of these injury issues don't keep creeping up on him moving forward. But it sounds to me like they're intending on keeping Ricky Pearsall around. That's just kind of the vibe I got listening to Kyle Shanahan speak. I really think Kyle Shanahan likes Ricky Pearsall and is going to give him at least another chance going into year 3. Then They were asked about playing the Seahawks and kind of what happened down the stretch, losing to them in two of the last three games of the season. Kind of asked Shanahan and Lynch whether or not they thought Seattle was, the measuring stick heading into this offseason and beyond. And, you know, of course, they're going to tell you that, they want to beat the Seahawks. They want to, you know, measure up to the teams ahead of them. And they said Seattle's definitely, one of them based on, what we saw down the stretch and the fact that they're still playing right now. And they kind of asked the media, that is, they kind of asked whether or not the Niners were going to kind of approach this offseason in a way of, hey, what are you going to do to catch Seattle? And without, going into specifics, they said, like, yeah, that's part of it. Like, they know they have to catch up to Seattle. They know they have to address, areas of this team to help themselves in their next matchup with that division rival. So, obviously, it's at the, at the top of their list of things to do. They need to catch Seattle. They need to get better. They know that. They know that. Next on the list, they asked about the pass rush this season, or lack thereof. And John Lynch said that, they're going to look at everything at that position. They're going to evaluate everyone on the roster, evaluate players coming back from injury. Obviously, it was tough with all of the injuries that they sustained throughout the course of the year. They said it wasn't a scheme related issue. It was more just about not having the horses to run the race. The fact that Nick Bosa was out, Mykel Williams was out. But Lynch emphasized that the team has to be better there. And so I don't think they're going to just sit on their laurels, sit on their hands and wait for injured players to come back. They're going to add to that room. They're going to make an effort to be more insulated on that defensive line, I feel, going into next season. And if you're a Niner fan who had to sit through and witness one of the worst pass rushing units in 49er history, that's got to feel good. Like, obviously, like, this team loves, building from the defensive line outward on defense, and they're going to evaluate everything there. But they mentioned that that's obviously something that they're looking at. Next on the list, they asked Kyle Shanahan about team speed, especially on offense, wide receiver, whether or not he felt if he felt the team was slow this year. And Shanahan said it. Yeah, the team was slower. And they were noticeably slower, was the quote from Shanahan, and they want to get faster, they want to get more explosive. They tried to do that. They had guys like Jordan Watkins and Jacob Cowing, but for whatever reason they were not able to get on the field, whether it was injuries or development issues, what have you. But they recognize that this team is slow and they need to get more explosive offensively this offseason. Next on the list, they got into the injuries coming out of the divisional round game up in Seattle. And, something kind of caught my eye very quickly. They said that Alfred Collins, defensive tackle Alfred Collins, is more than likely going to be going under the knife this offseason with shoulder surgery. They do expect him to be ready for training camp, I believe is what John Lynch said. But not good news coming out of that divisional game that Alfred Collins is more than likely going to be requiring shoulder surgery this offseason. And also backup tight end Jake Tonjes has a plantar fascia issue. He's not going to need surgery on that, luckily, but that's definitely something that he'll be healing from over the next few weeks. Next on the list, they asked about wide receiver Jauan Jennings and his impending free agency. They said they're going to try and get a deal done with Jauan. They value Jauan. They want him on the team. But with what Jauan Jennings is going to ask for, I find it a very, very hard stretch, a very hard sell, that they're going to really make a true effort to re-sign Jauan. I can't see them spending the kind of money that Jauan's going to ask for this offseason. I mean, we heard all the reports and all the rumors over the summer about the figures he was looking at. They ended up, coming together on a number for a salary adjustment this season. And if you heard Jauan Jennings during his exit interview with the media a couple of days ago, it sounds like he's a guy who wants to go out there and, test his value, find his market, and go and get the best deal for himself. And I just don't see the Niners matching what the free agent market may ultimately present to Jawan Jennings. I just don't. Um, they were next asked about some of the rookies who were not able to get on the field, guys like Jordan Watkins, the wide receiver, Nick Martin, the linebacker. With Nick Martin, they said that he dealt with some injuries. He had a very severe concussion that was difficult for him to come back from. Jordan Watkins was every time he would start to come on and make plays in practice or the preseason, he would deal with injuries. And it kind of sounded like Jordan Watkins may have been in the Shanahan doghouse this year. He was healthy down the stretch and still couldn't get on the field. And Shanahan also kind of hinted at the fact that maybe Jordan Watkins wasn't as developed as they would want. And we know how Shanahan is with rookies, especially on offense. And it just sounded like maybe Jordan Watkins, given the fact that he dealt with injuries at a couple different points this year, was just not able to ever get up to speed where Shanahan felt comfortable enough to put him out there on the field. And so that was definitely an interesting point or portion of the press conference for me. I really it kind of made more sense of why Jordan Watkins didn't get on the field after hearing Kyle Shanahan speak about it. So then Grant Cohn asked a question, a very specific one to Lynch and Shanahan, whether or not they're going to be looking to trade for a wide receiver. Now, here we are. It's, towards the end of January. What are they going to tell you? Yeah, we're going to go out and trade for a wide receiver on this team. No, they're not going to be specific, obviously. But Lynch and Shanahan said that they're going to explore everything and they're open to anything, just like they always say when asked about trades, whether it be their own players or going out and exploring potential options. But, I definitely expect the team to make some moves at wide receiver this offseason. I think they're going to make a pretty good reset in their wide receiver room this offseason for sure. Next question, next takeaway from the press conference. They asked about the cash spending aspect of things financially with this team. Last offseason, they had all the dead cap hit that they absorbed, and they also spent a ton of money extending some of their own players, Colton McKivitz, Brock Purdy, George Kittle, Fred Warner. Now that they got those big deals done, now that they've absorbed a ton of that dead cap, and now that Brandon Ayuk's future guarantees are coming off of the books in a way, how is the financial stuff going to be impacted going into this offseason? And Lynch said, yeah, that stuff last year definitely impacted the way that they wanted to spend. But it does sound like that going into this offseason, they are going to be looking to spend some more money, be more flexible, and be more along the lines of what Niner fans have been used to seeing the last several off seasons. Now, do I think they're going to go out there and sign 3 or 4 of the biggest name free agents? No, I don't. But I think if the right player comes along, I don't think they're going to shy away from spending money. They're going to have right around $50 million in cap space, and I think they're in a much better position financially to attack this offseason and fill some holes on this team. I do. And it sounds like they're preparing to do that. They then asked about the Seattle scheme, the wide 9 defensive front, along with the cover 3, the foundation of what the 49ers have done largely during Kyle Shanahan's tenure here. But Shanahan kind of pushed back on that a little bit and said, yeah, we've stuck with the 4 down, the 4 down front, the 4-man front, the wide 9. But he says it's kind of semantics. Like you do different things on the back end. You play different coverages. This year they played some more 5-man fronts and whatnot. But Shanahan said they do a little bit of everything, and they value being variable on the back end. They're not just married to the cover 3. They want to do different things. They want to experiment on the back end with coverages, but they do want to stick to their principles of, at the very least, a 4-man front with sprinkling in some 5-man fronts and obviously, some different blitz packages and stunts and things like that. But the Shanahan kind of pushed back on the whole Seattle scheme. And that makes me optimistic hearing about the defensive coordinator search and some of the names that are available. I mean, if you bring in a guy like a Jim Schwartz from Cleveland, if he doesn't end up getting the Cleveland Browns head coaching job and he's a viable candidate, he plays a lot more man coverage than what Robert Saleh did and what other previous defensive coordinators have done here in San Francisco. So I'm pleasantly surprised to hear Shanahan kind of push back on the rigidness of having to have the Seattle cover three. They have tried to do some more things on the back end of the defense and different coverages, play a little bit more man here and there. Obviously, you don't want to sit back and do the same zone coverage every single play. You're going to get eaten apart. But at the end of the day, they want to stick with the 4-man front, and that is the way this roster is built. I didn't expect anything else. They're not going to change to a cover. They're not going to change to a 3-4. They're not going to change like the foundation of what they do, 4-man pressure, 4-man front. They're not doing that. So people that have kind of been asking, oh, maybe we'll switch to a cover 3. Maybe they'll change what they do. Come on. We've been watching this team long enough. We know they're going to stick with the wide 9. They love Chris Kosurik's approach with that defensive line. They're going to stick with getting pressure with at least 4. And then, yeah, they're going to be more flexible on the back end. They're going to want to change things up here and there. But I think we know what the Niners do at this point, and I think we know that Kyle Shanahan is very slow to change at anything. So just keep that in mind as we get into this, defensive coordinator search. They then here we go. They then asked Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch about the very popular and famous electrical substation next to the practice facility, and it was funny. There was some chuckles from the media when this came up, because a lot of people seem to think that it's it's kind of a crock of what. It's kind of just a stupid thing to talk about. There's not much to it, but surprisingly, John Lynch kind of alluded to the fact that, yeah, they have looked into it and they are going to continue to look into it, maybe have some studies done. That was interesting to me to hear that they are, at the very least, like exploring the viability of the electrical substation actually causing some soft tissue issues with the team practicing next to Levi Stadium. So definitely an interesting little development there. We'll see what happens, but I don't expect much of anything to come from it. But at the very least, the team is paying attention. They are. So that was funny to listen to. They next asked about special teams, bringing back punter Thomas Morstead, kicker Eddie Pinheiro, long snapper John Weeks, and they want to bring all those guys back. That's the hope. That's the plan there. Then they were asked about Mykel Williams' rehab coming off of the torn ACL. John Lynch said that Mykel should be ready right around the start of training camp. So that's good news for the rookie. I believe he will be 21, maybe nearing 22, going into next season. He was really rounding into form prior to the injury, but he's a young guy. He's going to rehab. He's going to be healed up and ready to go for the start of the season, it sounds like, and that is encouraging news to hear. Then they asked about any additional staff changes, and what do they expect in terms of Robert Saleh maybe poaching some of the assistants from Shanahan's staff to go over to Tennessee with him. And Shanahan said that, yes, they do anticipate Robert Saleh potentially, grabbing some guys off of the staff. And, they definitely want to maintain continuity on their own coaching staff, and they will be looking to fill holes and examine their staff in the coming days and weeks as we get into the off season. Just a few more notes here, and we will wrap this thing up. They asked about George Kittle's recovery timeline from his torn Achilles. There is reason for optimism, according to John Lynch, after speaking with the surgeon who performed the surgery on Kittle. They do expect him back in 2026. Encouraging news. John Lynch kind of seemed a little perked up, a little on the positive side when speaking about Kittle's recovery from the torn Achilles. So I would expect George Kittle to return at some point in 2026. And Kittle sort of alluded to that based on where the injury took place, the severity of it, and his recovery. So I'm holding out hope, and I'm optimistic that George Kittle will be back on the field for the 49ers during the 2026 season. Now, this was an interesting one. Kyle Shanahan was asked specifically about backup rookie running back Jordan James. His first snaps of the year did not come until the divisional round playoff game up in Seattle, but Kyle Shanahan's, his ears perked up, his eyes got wide when they asked him about Jordan James, and he said he is real excited about Jordan James going into 2026. And they said if he attacks this offseason the way that they expect, they are very much looking forward to seeing the continued development of Jordan James. And just go back and check out Shanahan's sort of mannerisms and his reaction when he was asked about the rookie. He really seems to like this kid. So just keep that in mind. They did ask about whether or not, the 49ers window is open or closed, or how the team kind of feels about that whole topic. And again, just like they always do, they're not in the business of talking about open and closed windows. They're all about just attacking each year and trying to, win as many games as they can, and yada yada yada. The window question's kind of foolish. They're looking to compete every single year, and they're trying to win a Super Bowl, man. They're not going out there every year not trying to win a Super Bowl. They're trying to win as many games as they can. They know that their jobs aren't forever, so they got to win. They know this, and they kind of always scoff at the notion of windows being open or closed. Then they asked about Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch going into year 10 together, and they mentioned that they kind of rely on each other, and they've been together so long that they know how to speak to each other and get through ups and downs of a season, and they know how to talk about different topics together. Just being a tandem together so long has brought on a ton of familiarity that they really, really rely on in certain situations. And Lynch also said something that kind of caught my eye. He said that he is more fired up than ever to do his job and help the 49ers win a Super Bowl. There's been some speculation as to whether or not John Lynch may return to TV at some point, or maybe gets moved to a different role within the organization. How much longer is he really going to do this? But John Lynch said he's more fired up than ever to be doing what he's doing and helping the 49ers reach that ultimate goal of hoisting a sixth Lombardi. So that was interesting to hear from 49ers general manager John Lynch. Then the last little note that I have here from the presser, they asked again about the Brandon Ayuk situation and how they feel about, after making such an investment in Ayuk, kind of what happened, how do they feel about that entire situation? And they, again, alluded to the fact that, they're just as confused as anyone, and they don't really know how things got here. It's one of the crazier things that they've seen in their history of being around the game. But again, they reiterated that Brandon Ayuk has played his last snaps with the San Francisco 49ers. So we'll leave that there. That's all I got, guys. Those are my big-time takeaways from today's end-of-season press conference down at 49-49. Make sure you have your notifications on. Make sure you like and subscribe the channel, all that good stuff. I will be going live tonight because there is more exciting news that came about today regarding the 49ers' upcoming offseason approach, maybe some big-time trade rumors. So make sure you keep it locked right here on Keeping the Faith, where we will talk about anything and everything 49ers as we head into a big offseason for this team.